Hello and welcome to the Whitehall Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Westminster and Whitehall and beyond. I'm Callum MacDonald. Hello. Also on the podcast, Kirsty Buchanan, who is a special advisor to the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, Callum.
Lovely to have you there. And Joe Tanner, political strategist who advises politicians from across the political spectrum. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Thank
or
you
howdy,
both.
shall I say?
Well, yeah, you should say howdy. And actually, just before I introduce our guests, who are going to be the heart and soul of today's podcast, Joe, would you just like to explain what you are wearing, first of all?
Oh, sorry. I'm wearing a Tennessee Vols top, which is a wonderful gift from my husband. I had it for my my bachelorette party, which was in Nashville recently, and I had a whale of a time. So, yes, I'm wearing that in honour of the Yanks, who we love.
Well, indeed. Two of whom are about to be introduced, because on the podcast today, we are concentrating on President Trump. It has been 100 days of President Trump's second term, and just as we pressed record on the podcast today, news broke that the US economy shrank 0.3% in the first 3 months of the year, because firms have been stockpiling imports ahead of the imposition of tariffs as announced by President Trump. I'm sure that will come up in conversation today. You, of course, can have your say on the podcast as you're listening or watching. You can WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507 and start your message with the word Whitehall. Right, let's welcome our guests. First of all, Amy Koch, who was the first female Minnesota Senate Majority Leader. She attended the inauguration of Donald Trump. She is a Republican strategist, and she's on the Whitehall Sources podcast. Hello, Amy.
Hey, hello. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us. And from beautiful Tennessee, we're also joined by Chris Jackson, who was chairman of his local Democratic Party in Tennessee, and in fact was appointed by Joe Biden's campaign to the DNC Platform Committee. Chris, hello.
Hey guys, thanks for having me back.
It's so good to have you all here for a big conversation about Trump's first 100 days of Trump 2.0 of the second term. And actually, Amy and Chris, if I could start with each of you in turn. Amy, first of all, I want you just very briefly to give us Trump's biggest success and biggest failure of his first 100 days. We'll go on to talk about them in more detail, but as a headline, what would you say for success and failure?
I think his success has been the shutdown, almost complete shutdown of illegal crossings at the border. So immigration, and his biggest failure, I think, is the tariffs.
Yeah. Chris, a success and a failure of Trump, as far as you're concerned?
Well, I have to agree with Amy, at least on part of that. I think immigration, if you're going to point to anything that he's done, I think the numbers are about as low as they can go on immigration. I do have some disagreements about the way they've done it in some cases, but the numbers are down. And I would say the biggest failure so far is the economy, not just on the stock market, which has seen its worst year since the Nixon administration, but also, as you just said, we're now heading toward a recession where we were projected to have 3% growth when Joe Biden left office. So, you know, it takes a hell of an effort to wreck an economy like this in just 100 days, and he's done it.
Right, okay. We'll unpack more of this over the course of today's episode. Kirsty, I wonder if I could come to you for a success and a failure as well. From our side of things over here, how are you kind of perceiving Trump's first 100 days?
Well, I'm afraid we're all probably going to be in ardent agreement. The number of illegal border crossings has gone from from hundreds of thousands to a sort of steady trickle. I agree with Chris that that comes at the expense of little constitutional matters like due process, but it's certainly created more of a push than a pull factor. And the economy, the policy around tariffs, what that has done in terms of America's relationship with some of its strongest allies around the world and its standing in the world alongside the economy, the damage that has caused is incalculable. So I think we're probably all kind of in the same territory.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting to start with a bit of consensus. Joel, finally on this, again, your perception of 100 days of Trump?
I agree with everything that's been said, but if I were to throw in something different, I would say one of the most interesting things is that I think as a success, he has put America at the heart of almost every news bulletin he has put it onto the agenda of everybody around the world, which if you wanted to get attention for your country and to ensure that your country was being talked about, he's done that. And his biggest failure is that some of the reasons we're talking about it are for not very good reasons. And I think that's really where I think he's potentially gone wrong. So I'd say that as an attention grabbing exercise, he's succeeded and also failed in one go from my perspective.
Guys, I think this is such a fascinating start to the conversation. Let's open it up then. Let's get into some of these issues. Amy, if I could come to you first of all, just on the economy, the latest data, not positive for the US economy. And it's worth saying that, not even 24 hours ago, the White House press secretary was saying that the American economy was growing great guns. But actually this data that we've just talked about, it is worse for growth than economists had expected. Just gauge your level of concern. Has Trump trashed the economy, as Chris has put it already?
Yeah, well, I think it's obviously too soon to say he's trashed the economy. Well, that's a little hyperbolic. However, certainly the tariffs and inflation, which also he promised to get under control, has been a mixed bag driven by escalating prices. Again, kind of tracking back to tariffs. So I really think he believes in tariffs, which is hard for me to get my head around because historically it is just it's just been hugely problematic and never worked when people put them into place. And yet I think he really and truly believes. I'm not sure who he talked to. I'm not sure what he read. I'm not sure who was advising or where he came up with this idea that tariffs, he loved them, but he said it a million times on the trail. And I think that the campaign trail, people just simply refuse to believe him. He also has in his head the next narrative, which is there is going to be some front-loaded pain. That at the beginning, there's going to be some downtime, and we just have to wait, and then everything will go forward and be fantastic. And again, he's been letting the American people know that. However, I don't think that's playing well. Because he also had sort of this hyperbole about Biden's terrible economy, and I'm going to turn it around. And yes, the price of eggs has gone down, but no one in this first 100 days feels very stable in their job, in the cost of items. There's this like somebody mentioned offline about, are people going to start hoarding again? Companies are certainly, it's not hoarding, right? But they are keeping and holding on to their inventory, because no one knows what it's going to look like in the next 100 days. No one knows what Christmas is going to look like. And if we are still here in December and Trump has become the Grinch, I think that this problem gets a lot worse for him.
Yeah. Chris, what's your perception? Because there is some data, some research that was done, I think it was just last week actually, that suggested, although the kind of coverage of tariffs has been much like this, quite critical and circumspect about their impact, data showed that people who backed Trump, anytime he was talking about tariffs, they thought, well, it might be hurting, but at least he's doing what he said he would do. And there was some credit in the bank as a result of that. He was following through on a plan that he'd always talked about.
Sure. I mean, you can't fault him for actually trying to implement what he ran on. I'll give the guy that. He said it time and time again. And when Joe Biden was the nominee and when Kamala Harris was the nominee, they both pointed out that Donald Trump would do this. The American people were warned, and they chose Donald Trump, and he's implementing his policies. And so far, I think they've been a failure, at least on the economic front. And, it's interesting to see that yesterday he started to pull back some of the tariffs on auto industry here in America. I'd say the next month, it's going to be really interesting to see how much he pulls back on the others, especially in relation to China, because as Amy was saying, we're about to get into a point where it's going to affect supply chains, about like it did during COVID. And once people start seeing these empty shelves and inflated prices that are well beyond what we would even consider of being high, I think that's really going to hit home for a lot of people. And his approval rating's already down to about 42%, which is the lowest of any president at 100 days. So he's on the verge of losing whatever goodwill that he had when he won in November, I believe.
It's tough, that. It's trickier. This 100-day measuring point is kind of the fault, the inspiration of FDR and what he was able to do for the economy in 100 days. And it does go without saying clearly, there's the best part of 4 years still to go of this Trump administration. Kirsty, is it fair that we kind of judge after 100 days? What is the significance of it?
Well, like you say, I mean, it's one of those things that's been written in kind of political law. It doesn't have any particular kind of methodological underpinning to it. It's become one of those, media moments, if you like. And no, I don't think it's fair to judge anybody on the back of 100 days, achievements, particularly in politics, even for an administration that moves as fast and likes to break things as much as this one does. To actually achieve something in 100 days is remarkably difficult, even if you do aim for authoritarian strongman type politics. But I think what we've seen is in some ways kind of A, the nature of the man himself, and B, this kind of disruptor politics, this move fast and break things, has overshadowed quite a lot of the underpinning of why Trump won in the first place, why he was elected in the first place. So if we take tariffs for argument's sake, there is nothing wrong with the ambition to want to lower the cost of living for the working American man and woman. I mean, it's a perfectly responsible position to hold, particularly when it was as tough as it has been over recent years. But the response to how you do that is both kind of politically tin-eared and from a policy point of view is frankly bananas. I mean, there might be some economists outside of, the 19th century or the greatest of Trump sycophants that think that tariffs are the way to achieve reindustrialization of the American heartland and bring down costs, but I've yet to find or hear any of these people. So, I mean, we'll talk about other things, but the motivation. I mean, look, obviously his motivation is Trump, but the logic behind a lot of his direction of travel makes a lot of sense and connects with a lot of mainstream public opinion. But the political and the policy response is just taking people too fast, too far, or frankly in the wrong direction completely.
So here's my thought. So I'm going to history explain a little. The FDR actually was talking about the first 100 days of the Congress, not his first 100 days, but Congress. And I think it's notable in this 100 days, we don't have any bill of any significance at all from this Congress. This has been a one-man show. And I think that can be traced to what is the problem. And I don't think they will understand this because, as Kirsty said, it is in his very nature to do this on his own. He's thinking CEO. He's thinking this is how you ram things through. That is not how government works. You need to get buy-in. And he is lacking buy-in on everything. He's lacking buy-in maybe on his budget, but there's a lot of trepidation. We're going to see if they can get a budget out in September. On the tariffs, certainly. He's got no buy-in. He implements them with a stroke of his pen. And he's done no prep with the manufacturing industry. So we're not geared up for this. We're not geared up for this at all. They can't gear up in 100 days. And so what we're going to see are shortages, and we're going to see prices through the roof. So by him going it alone, sort of cowboying this, even Doge, you have no buy-in from Congress on government efficiency. I love the idea of finding the fraud, the waste, and abuse, and rooting it out and getting rid of it. Hooray! Great, go, go, go! I love even the idea of Doge, done properly, done with buy-in, done with protections around our nuclear codes. That I'm all in. How they have been doing it, it's just messy. When we can talk about internet, I want to get into I'm sure we're going to get across to Ukraine and NATO and all that, but that's just another example. He just hasn't. He's not asked anybody. He's just doing this all by himself, and it's creating problem after problem for him, I think.
But that is exactly, I think, why the 100-day marker is almost being made bigger than you might have with other presidents, because he hasn't sort of done I'm going to go through the usual channels, the proper channels. I'm going to use the might of the sort of the process that exists. I'm just going to use exec orders. And so actually with exec orders, that gives a sense of I'm doing it quickly. He's sort of had that sort of energy and suggestion that he's getting things done. And of course, the reality is, with all politicians we know, expectation management is something they often fall short of. And I think on this, like, there hasn't been that expectation management around, to the point that was made earlier about things may get tougher before they will get better. That hasn't. There's just been a sense of, I'm in and I'm doing stuff. And even a bit of the sort of, he's made the Village People a lot of money with their YMCA song. And, even when he's kind of out and about, it's that sort of, he's doing some really big stuff, not always popular stuff. And then if he sees a crowd, he does the thing again, and gets the dance going. And it's all a bit of a joke. And it's that sort of, there is a sort of problem, I think, the disconnect between the energy and where he's going, and then actually how that then is felt by people, and whether they've been marched up a hill that they're going to get left halfway up on that hill, and worse off potentially on that journey than actually getting to the top and seeing the fruits of the labor that he's put in.
I was just going to say, I agree. I think he set himself up for this in some ways, because everything he said during the campaign that he said he would accomplish on day one. I'm going to end the war on day one. I'm going to bring down costs on day one. And everybody knew that wasn't believable, but, he kept saying it. And, if we're going to hold him to the same standard we hold other politicians, he's failed. So, he's got a big problem, not only on the economic front, but also he's isolated the United States when it comes to foreign policy. He's attacked our biggest allies in Canada and Mexico and Europe. So, I really can't see anything beyond immigration where he could point to where it's been a success.
Kirsty.
If I can sound a early note of optimism about this. Look, Trump clearly wants to behave like an authoritarian leader, like a strong man, the strong men that he admires around the world. But he's trying to operate in a liberal democracy, and not only a liberal democracy, but one with a written constitution as well. And, what I've seen over the last 3 months is actually we're all still waiting for, some of the quite a lot of the Republicans to grow a spine, not least the ones that are worried about their seats in midterm. Democrats are still in an unholy mess, fine. But what we've started to see is some of those elements of a liberal democracy beginning to put pressure on Trump, and he has responded accordingly. So with tariffs, we saw, as he delightfully called it, the markets going yippee. The bond markets got nervous. We wiped, 11 trillion pounds off the stock market before he finally thought. But he reacted to it. Not fast enough, not to cause an unholy amount of mess, but he did react to it. He pressed pause. And now we hear a lot about, I'm going to do some great deals. We shall see on that. And similarly, I wonder whether this belated kind of softening of his position on Zelensky, and the belated understanding that the rest of us could have told him months ago, was that Putin was trying to string out this so he could gain as much land as he could before he was brought to heel by Trump. I wonder whether that's about, the politics of it, and the poll ratings collapsing as they have to, I think they've gone, over 10% in 3 months, whether that is him course correcting. And what we're beginning to see, and it is Trump and it's very early days, but what we're beginning to see is the start of a man trying to commit a very slow moving U-turn, so slow that we don't, that he hopes we don't notice what it is. But my point is, there is always checks and balances in a liberal democracy. And I think, if I'm going to be optimistic about it, that's what we're beginning to see. And after all, we did start off saying, the one thing about Trump is he's very transactional. And he should be taken seriously, not literally. Well, sometimes he should be taken literally, but I think ultimately he is transactional. And more than anybody else, because he's a gargantuan narcissist, he really cares what people think about him. And I think those poll ratings are beginning to put pressure on his politics.
Chris?
Yeah, I agree. He has no core values or principles. Like Kirsty was saying, he's purely transactional. If anybody says anything good about him, it's good in his eyes. If anybody wants to be on his side, he thinks that that's the best thing that you can do. So, there is some room maybe that he can course correct, but the time's running out because he only has a certain amount of time at the beginning of his term to implement things, and then we get toward the midterms and people in Congress really don't want to do much. So he's running out of time to accomplish any of the big things that he wants to do.
Amy, you wanted to talk about Ukraine and NATO and the impact he has had there. And actually, underpinning all of my thoughts in the conversation so far is the impact of Trump versus the success of Trump. And, those two things are not necessarily the same. He's certainly had huge impact in any number of ways. And NATO and Ukraine and Russia is certainly one of those things. We're yet to see success, I think it's fair to say, but the impact is huge.
Yeah, so here's with Trump. I just don't want him to waste or squander his opportunity on any of this. Him simply being strong about the border means border crossings that went from unmanageable by the Biden administration's own definition to a trickle in almost success so fast that the administration couldn't believe the success they were having. The same thing is happening, I think, on an international scale, right? So I really do feel like most Americans understand that America needs to have we need to not only respect our allies, but we need our allies to step up. If they want to be at the table, we need NATO members to step up and really be at the table, which means they're going to have to commit resources. They're going to have to commit personnel. Most NATO members do not even meet the 2% threshold that was established. It's unacceptable. And Trump going in and stating that and being strong about that gives NATO more strength. It actually not just helps the United States, it makes NATO real. And so I love that. I think it's glupo and pasna, foolish and dangerous to ever have trusted Putin. I was a former Russian linguist in the Air Force, and that man is never to be trusted. He's only after what is best for him, and he will do it in any means necessary. But I think that it's okay to have had those conversations and to fall back. I think there's not been, I think that the harm of it, luckily, has been staunched, and I think that we're coming to a realization with the administration, and I'm glad to see it. So in all these things, frankly, even just like a sort of culture in America, Chris, all due respect, but Democrats have just taken everything so damn far with the woke nonsense, and it just feels like we're to the point of hindering any kind of free speech about anything. Everybody just felt bottled up that we can't talk about and have reasonable debate or dissension on most any cultural issue, and I feel like people are finally saying that was enough. But so there's this tremendous opportunity for Trump, and yet I see him like stepping in it, and it is frustrating for me to see. And so anyway, that just cuts across internationally, nationally, border, economy, all of it.
Chris.
I think Trump's did real damage to the international alliance, especially in terms of Ukraine. I think he set back the effort in Ukraine. I think it was pretty much a stalemate for a couple years. And, when he came into office and was basically taking Putin's side on everything, I think that did real damage. And you have seen Europe step up in terms of money and arms. France is pretty much leading the way on that now. But, without the United States, I don't think there's going to be any success in Ukraine. And for Trump to continue to say that Putin, that Zelensky started the war, I don't know why he says that. We all know the truth about that. And also him attacking Canada as the 51st state and attacking Mexico and saying he's going to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal. The foreign policy of this administration has just been all over the map. And, we haven't gained any allies or any support through these actions. It's actually hurt our image in the world. And I think that's going to be a big detriment to him, especially moving forward.
But Chris, like you can't lump it all in. He said they were going to take back the Panama Canal because the Panamanians were doing real business with the Chinese, and costing our shipping, costing shipping and blocking shipments. And indeed, after he made some threats, Panama did not renew their contract that they had with with the Chinese entity. So like that I count as a success. It's for me, it's a real like all over, no pun intended, the map where his successes are and where they aren't. And I don't think it's fair to say they've been unsuccessful. They have been successful and also screwed some things up. So that's both.
But which country in the world is going to believe the United States when we give our word? If we continue to renege on things that we've agreed to in the past, or this flip-flop inconsistency on foreign policy, on economic policy, we need stability more than anything, and I think that's what people wanted in Donald Trump, was stability on the economic front and on the foreign policy front, and he's delivered anything but that.
And I think that's the
Well,
thing
well,
I was
look, what-
interested in was how. Sorry, who's going next? Sorry, I thought it was still me.
Go on, Joe.
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think interestingly, you raised that there was something that Amy said earlier that I thought was interesting, which was, I think that the ability of Trump to kind of bash heads together by effectively coming in and sort of shaking things up has been, on the one hand, impressive, but then there was a real reaction to the Zelensky Oval Office site, which was where I think he kind of, if you were talking in football metaphors, soccer to you guys in the UK's football, he lost the dressing room in a way. If part of the world was the dressing room, it was that moment where everyone went, hang on a minute, this is not the way we do stuff. This is not the way the leader of the free world should be behaving. And so there was that kind of Gaza Riviera sort of piece that there was a bit of ridicule over, and that kind of died down. But then that Zelensky moment for me was when I just felt that the really, even it's uncomfortable as someone from the UK, it's uncomfortable about that conversation about NATO and whether the UK have played a big enough part, whether we've been sort of fulfilling our obligations. It's difficult to hear, but there is an argument to suggest he was right to raise it. But then that spectacle of kind of just seeing Zelensky sat there and effectively being bullied by him and Vance in particular was just, it felt to me that was kind of, be tough, but don't be that tough. That's not right. And that's where sort of it felt like the world retreated a bit from him. And I think that was a massive step in what he's done so far.
Totally agree.
Yeah, look, I mean, Trump behaved appallingly with Zelensky and has behaved naively in relationship to Putin. I think we're all in agreement with that. But I have a certain amount of sympathy on two levels with the Trump administration on this. One, that again, there is nothing wrong with the idea of trying something different to bring about peace in a war that has got, seen 1 million people die or be injured and caused, catastrophic harm across the Ukraine. So look, I don't. Again, the direction of travel is a fair one, and I have a little bit of a lack of sympathy for Democrats getting their smelling salts out about what the Trump administration is or isn't prepared to do. When let's face it, what really emboldened Putin was Crimea in 2014 when he invaded Crimea and its allies looked at their shoes, came up with a lot of condemnation and did the sum total of, nothing squared.
Yeah,
and the last 3 years,
That's right.
And let's remember the last 3 years, Zelensky has had to badger the West over and over and over again to move further and faster on military equipment, even when they were trying to Trump-proof for Ukraine. The Biden administration still dragged its feet on allowing them to use those long-range missiles to improve their military position. So for a West that's given them just enough to continue the war, but not enough to win it for 3 years, for them to sort of start to lecture now, I think is a little bit rich. Trump is also 100% right on NATO. I mean, yes, there's a hypocrisy here. He wants people to pay 5%. American GDP spending on defence at the moment isn't at 5% either. I get all that. Right. But he's not wrong about this. The West has been, the NATO allies, the European Union has been caught napping for too long on this and on the Putin threat and on the China threat. And even now, again, we hear a lot of talk about the coalition of the willing, not much actual conversion into practical steps here. And if I could just, one other point, if I could, to come back on Amy's point about kind of culture wars again, he's 100% right. I think mainstream, middle America had a gutful of this overreach from the left. Now, where I slightly lose sympathy, well, don't slightly, completely lose sympathy with the administration is, again, we've had this pendulum swing, an over course correction from the Trump administration, which has taken things far too far. And it's fascinating now to see, look, the entire White House administration is a court of sycophants. So you're not going to get much pushback there. But what you're beginning to see now in America is some of those really powerful right-wing friends of Trump commentariat, Ben Shapiro, Douglas Murray's, Joe Rogan, beginning to say to Trump, hold on a minute, you are going too far, pull it back a bit, and trying to ward him off, overcorrecting against what he had seen as an overreach by the left.
I find it fascinating, actually, that we have only sort of brushed over where the Democrats are at in all of this. And Chris, I wonder if I can start with you on this, because I was noticing that it's, it was a bruising electoral loss for the Democrats. There's been a lot of introspection, perhaps, since then. But I think it's fair to say the Democrats have really struggled to find their voices as anything resembling opposition or resistance to Trump. There's perhaps a couple of big names continuing their sort of very loud and proud defense of Democrat values. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They're on this anti-oligarchy tour, as they're calling it. And they are, they're drawing crowds. I just wonder if you think are they the future? Is Bernie Sanders the future of the Democrat Party?
I don't think so, and I hope not. I was one of the ones in 2000 that was sounding the alarm when Bernie was running against Joe Biden in the primary, and I think Bernie's too far left on a lot of issues, but, we're a big tent party. He can have his voice. I hope we don't suppress it. AOC, she brings a lot of new people into the fold, so, I'm not going to begrudge her for what she's saying or doing. I think she has a seat at the table, but I hope we look at, moving forward, governors like Andy Beshear in Kentucky, a successful two-term governor, Shapiro in Pennsylvania, even Pritzker in Illinois. There's a lot, and Whitmer in Michigan. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party. And, for all the people that said the Democratic Party was dead after the November elections, we just took the lead on the generic ballot this week for the next elections. So, just within 100 days almost, the Democrats are already projected to take back Congress. Now, that may or may not hold, but, being leaderless right now pretty much for the Democratic Party may be a blessing, because you don't have somebody that the Republicans can target like they used to with Nancy Pelosi and, the way Democrats do with Mitch McConnell. So maybe not having a big name at the top in Congress is a blessing in disguise, because it seems to be working so far.
That is fascinating. That's something I hadn't considered, actually. That Amy, that is a problem for the Republicans. There's not a bad guy, as it were, for the Republicans to point at.
Yeah, no, for sure. Chris, I noticed you didn't mention Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in that list of prospective future. I'm just,
Hey, I like Tim Walz. I actually think that he would be a good addition to the field. I think he has a good message.
I like Tim too. I just don't like him as my governor, but I like him. So some thoughts. I think there is that sense, but right now the Trump administration has their enemies that they're able to point to. One of them is sort of dying or is quieted down, in that the border crossings have been like shutting down the border has been such a success. And you will see the Trump administration, whenever they start to get into trouble, if immigration can be in the news that day, they are winning, because that's what they've done, I think, politically in a really good way, is sort of pivoting to and finding those things to talk about that America doesn't like. They'll also bring up sort of the waste that they're finding in the federal government. And look, you can look under, almost every stack of budget papers and find waste, I promise you, in the trillions and trillions of dollars that the federal government spends. And so that's kind of a never ending source of things. And when that fails, they talk about elite, universities. And so they're able to find those sort of those things to play off of. But then they tend to sometimes step too far, right? So Trump's been now going after not just like universities, but like big law firms, which feels very personal, and literally people that have been named now and targeted. And I think that is where, again, in our democracy, Americans just go, whoa, 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 right?
Yeah.
I'm with you to this point, and now you're targeting Americans, and that's not how things work in this country. We're not okay with that, and so you start to see pushback, and and hopefully, and some sort of shift, because Trump really ultimately just wants people to like him.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we've gone through most of the things that I had personally written down about Trump's 100 days, although there is something on here that nobody's mentioned, and that is the pardoning of the January the 6th rioters, which was actually one of the first things he did in his first 100 days. And I think it's hugely significant, and actually the number of significant things we've talked about, that is one that potentially gets overlooked as a kind of statement of intent almost of how President Trump took
it was
office.
a massive deal, but then there's been so many other massive
Exactly,
things
yeah.
that we've completely forgotten it happened.
Yeah.
That's a sign. It's like a soap opera with like these big, huge. It's like Bobby Ewing coming out of the shower repeatedly, like week after week, isn't it? There's been so many like jaw-dropping moments that you can't remember the first one anymore.
And that's by design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. It just keeps us all busy, Chris. Is that your point? That we're constantly on to the next
Oh,
thing, so
absolutely.
we can't ever get to grips with things. Yeah.
Absolutely. If I can say one thing about the second Trump administration is that they were ready. They had everything planned. As much as he disavowed Project 2025, they've pretty much followed it by the book. It may not be word for word, but the intent is there with the policies that he's put into place and the people that he's put into place. And I think that he's went too far in all these areas because he has no one around him, no one in his administration, and nobody in Congress that is willing to tell him no. Nobody will say no to him. And that's why he's going too far, and it's hurting him. And until Republicans in Congress are willing to hold him accountable, Democrats, they came out against Joe Biden and told him he didn't need to run again. These guys in the Republican Congress won't even.
Not many, Chris. Not many.
Oh, it was quite a bit. But
very few.
But
that man would have been gone.
But the Republicans in Congress can't even tell Trump no on the most obvious things that they've believed in for years, and Trump will say the opposite, and they just remain quiet. And until that changes, I don't see him changing. And like you said, like we were talking about, I think all this is by design. He's just throwing things out there every single day, and it's hard to pin him down on one thing because, it's kind of like a blitzkrieg. It's too much for everybody to cover, and some of it gets missed. And the January 6th pardons, I think, are unfortunately one of those.
I did have a question, actually, and Chris, you've touched on this, on Team Trump. And, they were ready, as you say, they kind of hit the ground running. But I was reading an article, funnily enough, by Douglas Murray earlier in the New York Times, which was quite critical of Steve Witkoff, who, of course, has been the front man on attempts to negotiate peace between Russia and Ukraine. And this idea that actually people like Witkoff might be dragging Trump down, might be kind of dead weight in the administration, not experienced, inexperienced,
Sure.
Trying to fulfill roles that perhaps they're not suited for. We've already heard that Elon Musk is going to start sort of backing off his government involvement because Tesla needs some TLC, as we would say. Amy, what's your perception of Team Trump?
Yeah, the problem is that when you go through the list of people that are like so vociferously sycophantic to Trump, you start to run out of a list, right? And so for example, from Minnesota, the Secretary of Defense is Pete Hegseth. And Pete Hegseth was not, in my opinion, as a veteran, prepared to run the Department of Defense. And it has been, by all reports inside and also publicly, with these Slack conversations that have gone public, where maneuvers and defense things that are highly classified have been made public. And so I think that even more than Elon, I think Pete Hegseth is sort of exemplary of, this is a guy that was a veteran for sure and served admirably, but then was on Fox News saying really good things about Donald Trump. And now he's the Secretary of Defense, which is a position, that I am certainly not qualified to handle as a as a veteran, and I don't think he was qualified for it. It is a massive job. We need a very qualified, strong person at the top, I'm very sad to say that is not Pete Hegseth.
Yep.
So go on, Kirsty.
No, I was just, when Liz Truss came in for those few glorious days as the UK Prime Minister before her administration imploded, there was a great quote. It was an anonymous one that someone put into one of the newspapers about her cabinet. And it said, "This isn't so much a government, this is more like a protection racket." And I think one of the big lessons that Trump learned from the first term to this term is, for Trump, deliberately surround yourself with sycophants who will spend more time squabbling with each other to get the ear of the mad king than they will standing up to him and holding him to account. And I think, Chris, you're absolutely right. This is probably why, this hasn't, partly because the Republicans, we're still waiting for them to, to grow a spine again, but also, because he's just entirely surrounded by people that won't say no, and that also is deliberate. And so we see people coming into, when Chris is talking about, it's by design, all this kind of flood the zone, every day 20 new announcements. Some of this stuff just gets completely lost. Trump had Laura Loomer into the White House. Laura Loomer is a conspiracy theory nut job of the far right. The fact that that just kind of got washed away in the kind of cascade of Trump land is insane to me. Last week, Trump, announced another load of Trump coins in effectively a competition. So the people that buy the most of these get access to Trump and a tour of the White House. Now, I'm no legal expert, but that strikes me as like insanely illegal to boost your own Bitcoin and give access to yourself and the White House as as the incentive. But all these things just get lost in the mix. And Chris is 100% right about that. That is by design so that we don't see some of this. But let's not, the flirting with, the AfD with Musk in Germany, the love affair between Musk and Tommy Robinson in the UK, having, people like Laura Loomer in to talk to you. This is what I mean about, people within the commentariat within the right are beginning to say, hold on a minute, there's a difference between what you want to do and this kind of really, quite far right, hard right agenda of the people that are beginning to get access to you. It's very worrying.
It's been a fascinating conversation, all. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts. At this point, then, 100 days into President Trump's second administration, our beloved Kirsty Buchanan has designed something of a Trump-related quiz to assess how closely we have all been paying attention. Kirsty, over to you.
Okay, now because we don't have buzzers, I've
We don't
given you
have the budget for those.
We don't have a budget for those, yeah.
Yourself
I've given you all a Trumpism to shout out so that I know that you are the person that, I could hear first, as it were.
I'm putting
Now,
the hat on for this.
You don't have to do them in the manner of Trump, but there might be, if there's a deal breaker, those that do it in the most Trump-like voice might get an extra point or two. So, Amy, if you know the answer, I want you to shout out, Elon.
Elon.
Elon. Chris, if you know the answer, I want you to shout out Putin.
Got it.
Otherwise known as Putin. Joe, if you know the answer, I want you to shout out China.
China.
Good impression.
And Callum, I was a bit mean with you, so you're either going to have Tren de Agua, and I want you to say it like that, Tren de Agua.
Yeah.
Or you can say tariffs.
I might lean on tariffs, only because my I'm not sure my accent will live up to it. But let's see how we go. I might be spontaneous.
Okay, right. Contestants, are you ready?
Yes.
Ready.
Question number 1. Sycophant Republican Congressman Earl Buddy Carter introduced a bill to rename Greenland what?
Don't know.
No,
I'm
take
not quick enough on Google.
Elon.
Oh, Amy.
I'll just take a guess. Let's see. New America.
Close but no cigar. It was Red, White and Blue Land.
Oh, very
wow.
good,
Uh,
actually.
my
Yeah.
my absolute
I actually love that. Oh, dang it.
yeah, that's my favourite story of the last 100 days. Right, what despotic, woman-hating, tyrannical, terrorist, jihadi regime ended up getting the same tariff from Trump as our loyal US allies in Britain?
Oh.
Hmm.
Tyrannical, terrorist, woman-hating regime.
Is it
America.
Norfolk Island?
Please, no, you've got to
China.
shout out.
China.
Joe?
Is it the penguins on Norfolk Island?
No, it is not.
Putin,
Penguins have never been classed as a. Yes, Chris.
the Taliban,
Correct.
Nice.
1 point for Chris is off the leaderboard. Right, what is odd about the Heard and McDonald Islands, which received a 10-point tariff from Trump?
Putin.
Elon.
Chris.
They have no citizens other than penguins.
Correct.
Very good.
What did Elon Musk accuse Scott Bessent of being in their White House bust-up?
Elon.
Amy?
Did he say it was a left-wing cuck?
Close, but I give you that one.
Tariffs.
Callum?
I mean, he called him basically really stupid, didn't he? Didn't he say he was as stupid as something or as stupid something?
That was not during the bust-up. I think that might have been on Twitter afterwards.
Oh, fair. Oh, I don't know in that case.
No takers? A Soros agent. Right.
Perfect.
How many children does Elon Musk have that we know about?
Putin.
China.
Elon.
Joe?
12.
Incorrect.
Putin.
Elon.
Amy, I think, was behind Joe, so I'm going to go to Amy first.
Oh, okay. So 1, and he's not a Trump fan.
Incorrect.
Putin.
Chris?
I believe he has 13, even though he's not acknowledging the last one.
Correct.
Nice.
It's hard to keep up.
It's hard to
I
come
was
to
almost right then. I was almost right with a dozen.
Chris
Yeah,
is
you're
storming
right.
ahead here, by the way. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
he's
Well
killing
done,
it.
Chris. Yeah.
I'm just saying. How do you pronounce the name of Elon Musk's child that he had with Grimes?
Oh, I don't know which one that is. Which one is it?
It's the one with all the weirdy initials and
Oh,
letters
yeah.
and symbols and other
China.
nonsense. Joe?
Dave. That's my answer to everything. If you're not sure about a name.
I'm going to give you Dave. It's not right, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. It's X-12.
Yeah, I think Dave's better. I think that.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we should start a campaign.
A bit more universal
think
with
that-
Dave.
Right, how much money did Elon and the Dogebags say they were going to save the American taxpayer?
Putin.
Chris?
They said 3 trillion, and then they lowered it every single week, it seems like.
Yes, so far I think it's 95 billion that they've got to, but yes, you're right. Okay. Next question. What did Trump accuse Zelensky of gambling with in their Oval Office bust-up?
Tariffs.
Callum?
Democracy.
No. Incorrect.
China.
Joe?
Lives.
A bit more? You're gambling with...
Oh, tariffs.
Oh.
World War III.
Oh.
Callum, yes.
Ah, damn it.
I'll give it to you, Callum. You're gambling with millions
Sorry.
of people's lives. You're gambling with World War III.
Oh, come on. I was there. I said lives. I just
Stole
didn't
it.
quantify many.
Stole it.
I'm going to start moaning like Trump. This is what happens when you wear the hat.
Look, I gave you a point for Dave. I
It's
gave you a
rigged.
point for Dave, Joe. I
You
didn't have
did
to
get a
do
point
that.
for Dave.
Right, in Signalgate, wait, pay attention. In Signalgate, name the country that they were discussing bombing.
Elon.
Amy.
Yemen.
Correct. Amy is on the lead bird.
Finally. This is embarrassing.
Right, who accidentally invited a journalist into that chat?
Elon.
Amy.
Waltz.
Correct.
Come
Next
on
question.
now.
Next question. Name the journalist that found himself to his great delight
Putin.
in that chat.
Elon.
Chris was first.
Horowitz.
Incorrect.
Goldberg. Elon.
Oh,
Goldberg.
that's right.
Amy is
Goldberg.
correct.
Is it
And
Jeff?
one more about Signalgate. What is the magazine that Goldberg works for?
China.
Tariffs.
Oh, Joe was off.
Atlantic.
Correct. One
Yo.
legitimate
Got a
point.
proper answer right.
What did Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth refer to Europe as on that Signal chat? I'll give you a clue. It wasn't very nice.
No, it wasn't very nice.
Really? You surprised me.
Oh, I don't know.
No takers?
No.
No.
He said they were pathetic and freeloaders.
Nice.
Freeloaders, yeah.
Yeah, freeloaders.
What percentage of GDP does America want its NATO allies to spend on defence?
Elon,
Amy?
5%.
Correct. How much does America spend as a
Elon.
proportion of its... Oh, Amy?
3%.
Close. If I get no bang on that, I might give you half a point.
Putin,
No other takers? Oh, Chris?
3.2%.
Right. Any other takers?
3.5.
Callum? Are you going to throw one into the ring?
Yeah, it's like 3.7.
Callum is correct. It is
Ooh.
exactly.
Nice.
He Googled while we were all
I
doing
did not.
Outrage, 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 outrage. At the Munich Security Conference, J.D. Vance lectured Europe for failing to uphold the value of what?
Putin,
Elon.
Chris?
free speech.
Correct. In a classic pot calling kettle back moment. When Trump, what did Trump say was the cause of him deciding to put a pause on tariffs? What behaviour from the markets?
Oh, China.
Elon.
Go.
Was it the yippee?
Yep.
Yes. So there's a lot of people being a bit yippy. Okay, to the nearest trillion. How much was wiped off the value of the global stock exchange by
Elon.
tariffs? Amy?
11 billion pounds.
11.
Oh, 11 trillion pounds. Sorry, 11 trillion pounds. God, 11 billion would be
Yeah.
nothing. 11 trillion.
We wish it was 11 billion, yeah. Right, into the home straight now. How many days behind schedule is Trump in his promise to bring peace to the Ukraine?
Putin.
Tariffs.
China.
I think Chris had the edge on that one.
Probably.
Well, since he said day one, I would go 100 days.
Correct.
Well, is it
Right.
technically 99?
No, well, actually, no, it's technically 100 because this is 101
This is
days for us, isn't it?
101.
So, which British frontbencher described Donald Trump as deluded, dishonest, xenophobic narcissist, a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, and a tyrant in a toupee?
It's comprehensive.
They were all so good, I couldn't choose which
Yeah.
ones. I plucked them all together. Didn't throw that all at the same time, and he didn't
Did you
say
say
it while.
frontbencher?
Yeah,
Frontbencher.
a senior Labour frontbencher.
Tariffs.
Callum,
It's got to be the brainless David Lammy.
correct. Which
Our-
senior
our-
Labour...
Secretary, by the way.
Our
for-
one of the great offices of state, Foreign Secretary, held by David Lammy.
Which senior Labour frontbencher described Donald Trump as a man of incredible grace, very funny, very friendly, very warm about the UK?
Tariffs.
Callum?
Was that also David Lammy?
Correct. And the final question, I'd like to say it is a deal breaker, but I don't think it is. Where is the 51st state of America?
Elon.
Tariffs.
Amy, I think, had that.
Canada.
Incorrect.
This is brave to tell an American they don't know where the 51st state is, but anyway.
I thought it was going to be Governor Carney's Canada.
Well,
Is it
the-
red, white,
the
and
answer
blue
is
land?
it's a... Anybody else want to take a guess?
Is it are you about to say it's a trick question?
Callum,
Yeah.
do you want to answer those?
Tariffs. Is it a trick question, Kirsty?
Yes, it is.
Oh, boo.
There is no 51st state of America. There is the independent sovereign nation of Canada.
We refuse to accept that answer. Speaking for America, we refuse to accept that answer. There's a 51st
It was all going
state.
so well, and
All
now
going
we've
so
just
well.
completely
So-
damaged relations.
In fourth place, we have Joe, China, on
China.
3 points. In third place, we have Callum, tariffs on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points.
Take it.
In second place, we have Elon, Amy on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, joint. In fact, joint second. There you go.
Oh, that makes me.
And storming into the lead, Putin Chris on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points.
Bravo.
Done.
Bravo. Amy and Chris, thank you so much for such great conversation and for sharing all of your knowledge over the last few minutes in our quiz as well. It's so good to catch up with you guys. Thank you for joining the pod.
It's been fun.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
guys.
much.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
thanks for the start of the democratic fight back, Chris, with your performance on the quiz.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
It bodes well for the future.
Very so.
That's definitely a signal. We're in trouble for the midterms. That's all I got to say.
There you go.
Guys, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.